Imagine living on a Pacific island where you can just pull out your smartphone and you connect to a high-speed network. And you can stream a 4K documentary or video call a relative on the other side of the planet without a single buffer.
Yeah, seamless.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You possess this completely frictionless 21st century digital connectivity. But then, say, tomorrow, your refrigerator breaks down and you need a specialized mechanical part.
Right, a physical object.
Yeah, that physical piece of metal and plastic might take, I don't know, 3 months to reach you. And that's assuming the shipping route isn't disrupted by a storm. You are digitally ubiquitous, yet completely physically marooned.
It is an incredibly jarring juxtaposition. You're basically describing a population living simultaneously in the hyper-connected future and, well, the logistically isolated past.
And today, we're taking you into the heart of that exact paradox. We have this massive stack of multidimensional macro data sitting right in front of us.
Yeah, drawn from the World Bank, the IMF, the UN.
Right, all focusing entirely on the Comprehensive Development Research Report for the Marshall Islands. But, and this is crucial, we aren't just looking at this as some remote geographical curiosity.
No, not at all.
The Marshall Islands is operating as a real-time crystal ball for all of us. If you want a preview of what happens to coastal megacities like, Miami, Mumbai, or Jakarta when sea levels rise, or when global supply chains fracture, you look at the data coming out of the Marshall Islands right now.
Because the massive demographic shifts and economic challenges colliding there today are coming for everyone else tomorrow.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the baseline survival metric of any nation, which is the economy.
Right, the macro level.
Yeah, and looking at the GDP growth rate from 1990 to 2023 in this report, it doesn't look like a standard economic curve.
It looks more like an erratic heart monitor, honestly.
That is the perfect way to describe it. In 2003, there was this unbelievable spike. The GDP grew by 30.7% in 12 months.
Which is astronomical.
But immediately after, it just collapses into severe pullbacks. The line on this chart just violently whips up and down.
Well, when analyzing the gross domestic product of small island developing states, or SIDs as they're called, the defining characteristic is almost always extreme volatility.
Because they're so small.
Exactly. The denominator, meaning the total economic scale of the country, is so low that any sudden injection or withdrawal of capital creates a statistical earthquake.
Okay, so their GDP acts less like a steady humming engine and more like, I don't know, a solar panel connected to a faulty battery.
That's a great analogy, actually.
Right, like when the sun shines, meaning when a large foreign grant clears or some international development fund is dispersed, there's a massive surge of power. You get that 30% spike.
Yeah, but because they lack the robust domestic industrial infrastructure to store and compound that wealth, the moment a global crisis blocks the sun, the power cuts out completely.
It just goes dark.
That is a highly accurate mechanical view of their vulnerability. I mean, a 30% spike in a diversified economy means a revolutionary new industry was born. In an isolated island economy, it almost universally points to external capital inflows.
Which brings us to another metric. Looking at their gross national income, or GNI, alongside the GDP it's super revealing.
It is. While both per capita metrics experienced a slow, grueling uphill climb for a few decades, they completely stalled out around 2015.
They just hit a brick wall.
The wealth accumulation hit a ceiling, yeah.
Yeah.
Because, GDP measures what is produced inside the borders, while GNI includes income from overseas.
So the plateau tells us that neither local productivity nor external income was growing fast enough to outpace inflation.
Or global economic pressures, right.
Okay, but if their domestic economy can't outpace those pressures, their national savings must be taking a massive hit to make up the difference.
Oh, absolutely. And that leads to a statistic in the World Bank data that completely defies standard financial logic.
Yeah, I saw this and did a double take. Their gross domestic savings as a percentage of GDP is chronically negative.
Deeply negative.
We're looking at fluctuations between 0 and minus 60%. Wait, a minus 60% savings rate?
Yeah, negative 60.
If our regular household spends 60% more than it produces, they go bankrupt. They lose the house. Are we just looking at a sovereign nation acting as an international ward of the state?
Economically speaking, you are observing a state sustained by an artificial life support system. In macroeconomic accounting, a negative gross domestic savings rate fundamentally means something very specific.
Which is?
It means that the total value of consumption, like everything the government and private citizens are eating, using, and burning, vastly exceeds the value of everything they produce.
So how do they not default instantly? Where is the phantom money coming from year after year to cover a 60% shortfall?
It comes from massive, sustained external transfer payments,
Like
foreign aid, development grants, international compacts. This creates what economists often call a wealth illusion.
a wealth illusion. Explain that for the listener, because that's a fascinating term.
Well, if you walk down the street in the capital, Majuro, you might see imported cars driving by and stocked grocery shelves.
It looks normal.
Right. It gives the illusion of a functioning, self-sustaining economy. But the underlying math reveals that those shelves are stocked entirely by the grace of foreign capital inflows. They are using outside money simply to keep the municipal lights on and import basic survival goods.
I want you, the listener, to really internalize the precariousness of that reality. Imagine if your entire community relied on a discretionary grant from a distant organization just to afford the diesel fuel that powers your local water treatment plant.
It's terrifying when you phrase it like that.
But that's the reality. If the global economy sneezes or international priorities shift, your town doesn't just face a recession, it faces an immediate existential crisis.
And that profound economic fragility, it dictates the behavior of the citizens. If the economy is an artificial construct sustained by outside capital, it severely impacts human geography, which perfectly explains the demographic nosedive in the data.
Right, let's pivot to the flow of humans, because if the flow of money is that unstable, the people are going to react. We go from a period of rapid, robust population growth starting in the 1960s straight into a brick wall in the 2010s.
A very hard brick wall.
The population growth rate didn't just taper off, it went negative. It plunged below -3% annually.
And just for context, a sustained population contraction of over 3% a him is typically a statistical signature of a catastrophic event.
Like a war.
A major armed conflict, a famine, or a severe pandemic. It's rarely seen in a peacetime, stable democracy.
But the data shows this isn't from a mass casualty event. This is an exodus. While birth rates might be slowly stabilizing, the overwhelming driver of this negative growth is external migration.
People are leaving the country entirely.
And the internal movement is just as drastic. The urbanization rate is approaching nearly 100%.
Right.
People are abandoning the rural outer atolls and concentrating heavily in the capital.
This creates a compounding crisis. You have hyper-urbanization on a tiny strip of land, which strains the capital's infrastructure.
The housing, the sanitation.
Everything is pushed to the breaking point. People migrate from the outer islands to the capital, seeking jobs, education, or healthcare that just no longer exists in rural areas.
But then they hit that wealth illusion.
Exactly. When they realize the capital's economy is capped by that wealth illusion we discussed, their next step is often international immigration.
And the people leaving are taking the country's economic future with them. If we look at the age structure charts in the report, it shows a dramatic hollowing out.
The demographic pyramid is totally distorting.
Yeah. The proportion of children, those aged 0 to 14, has plummeted from 46% of the population down to about 34%.
Meanwhile, the elderly dependency ratio is steadily creeping upward.
Right.
What's fascinating here is how this completely subverts the standard demographic model of developing nations.
How so?
Typically, as a country modernizes its healthcare, child mortality drops.
Okay.
A few decades later, birth rates naturally fall. This creates a magic window called the demographic dividend.
Right, the boom.
Yes. You suddenly have a massive, bulging generation of working-age adults relative to a shrinking number of dependent children and a still small number of elderly.
That's the sweet spot. That's maximum workers, maximum tax revenue, minimum dependence. It's when an economy can absolutely roar to life.
Precisely. It is the engine that drove the massive economic booms in East Asia during the late 20th century. But in the Marshall Islands, that expected demographic dividend is evaporating before it can even be harnessed.
Because they're the ones leaving.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The very people who should make up that massive working age boom, the healthy, educated adults in their 20s and 30s, are exactly the ones most capable of emigrating to find better wages.
Leaving a crushingly heavy burden on the youth who stay behind. The data indicates the youth dependency ratio is still sitting at over 60%.
It's a massive weight on their shoulders.
So imagine being a 25-year-old remaining in the country. Your peer group is shrinking, but you are still expected to generate the economic activity to support a massive base of children and a growing cohort of the elderly.
You are essentially holding up a collapsing demographic tent.
It creates a structural trap.
It does. The middle of the demographic pyramid is hollowed out.
Okay, so if the remaining youth are the most valuable, scarce resource the country has left, the obvious next question is, how is the system investing in their potential?
Right, which leads us directly to the human capital metrics.
Let's look at education first. On the surface, the initial access looks triumphant.
It looks great.
The gross primary school enrollment rate is consistently over 100%. The kids are absolutely getting into the classroom. But the data reveals a brutal bottleneck when it comes to completion rates and the transition to secondary school.
Yeah, the transition from primary to secondary education is, it's notoriously difficult in resource-constrained environments because, primary schools can be localized.
Right, like a small school on a remote atoll.
Exactly, you can set that up anywhere. But secondary schools require specialized teachers or, like, science labs and larger facilities, meaning they're usually centralized.
So for a student on an outer island, attending high school might mean literally relocating away from their family.
Which is a huge barrier.
And then the UN data shows a deeply concerning anomaly. In 2023, the percentage of out-of-school adolescents suddenly spiked to over 24%.
That is a massive jump.
Nearly a quarter of the teenage population just vanished from the educational system in a single year. We have to ask why. Are they dropping out to enter a gig economy? Are they giving up on local education because they are preparing to emigrate?
Well, while quantitative data points to the what, we have to deduce the why from the surrounding economic context.
Okay, lay it out for us.
That 2023 spike likely reflects compounding systemic shocks. Consider the lingering economic hangover from recent global supply chain disruptions.
The inflation spikes.
Right. When the cost of imported goods skyrockets in a nation completely dependent on imports, household budgets shatter. A 15-year-old might be forced to drop out to find wage labor.
Or perhaps return to subsistence fishing just to feed the family.
Exactly. Furthermore, if the youth observe that a local high school diploma does not translate into a sustainable career because the domestic economy is stagnant, the perceived value of that education plummets.
So why stay in school if the only viable career path is moving to another country that might not even recognize the diploma anyway?
It's a very rational, albeit tragic, calculation for a family to make.
But the data does show a deliberate attempt to fight this gravity. There are some silver linings here.
Yes, the teacher training metrics.
Right. In 2019, the percentage of trained secondary teachers leaped from around 50% to over 70%. And over half of the primary teachers are women, and that number is still rising.
That is a critical institutional victory. Improving the percentage of formally trained teachers from half to nearly three-quarters shows a dedicated policy push.
It's a real financial investment into the quality of instruction.
Exactly. And the rising parity of female educators also points to long-term social resilience. They are clearly trying to build the institutional capacity to retain those students.
They are getting better, more qualified teachers into the classrooms, but the sheer economic gravity of their situation is pulling the older kids out of the seats.
It's an uphill battle.
Now, if we shift from the classrooms to the clinics, the health data presents an even more complex paradox.
Oh, the health data it's heavy.
We have to acknowledge what the report terms the survival miracle first. In 1960, the under-5 child mortality rate was horrifyingly high, about 100 deaths per 1,000 live births.
A 10% mortality rate for young children.
But today, that number has plummeted to low, modern levels. Female life expectancy is holding very steady above 65 years.
Which is great. The eradication of high infant mortality is a monumental public health achievement. It indicates that basic sanitation, the cold chain for vaccines, and basic maternal care have fundamentally stabilized.
The biological baseline of survival has been secured.
Right.
But the quality of that surviving life is under severe attack. The data highlights the double burden of nutrition, and it is a full-blown systemic crisis.
It really is a double-edged sword.
On one side of the ledger, about 35% of children under 5 suffer from stunting.
And stunting is one of the most insidious public health metrics we track.
Explain what stunting actually means in this context.
It indicates chronic undernutrition over a prolonged period. It is often referred to as hidden hunger.
Hidden hunger.
Right, because the child might be consuming calories, their stomach is full, but those calories are entirely devoid of the essential micronutrients required for healthy bone growth.
And neurological development.
Crucially, neurological development, yes. Stunting causes irreversible cognitive deficits that limit a child's learning capacity and, eventually, their future economic productivity.
So you have over a third of the child population suffering from chronic hidden hunger. But simultaneously, adult diabetes is absolutely rampant.
It's sitting at around 25% of the adult population.
A quarter of the adults have diabetes, which the data directly links to skyrocketing rates of overweight and obesity. How is it biologically and economically possible to have a society that is simultaneously starving for nutrients and suffering from mass obesity?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it traces directly back to the economic isolation and the negative savings rate we discussed earlier.
The import dependency.
Exactly. The Marshall Islands has extremely limited arable land. What little soil they have is increasingly degraded by salinization.
Saltwater intrusion from rising sea levels creeping into the groundwater.
Right. They simply cannot grow enough fresh produce to support a highly urbanized population.
Which means they have to import their calories. And what is the cheapest, most efficient calorie to ship across thousands of miles of the Pacific Ocean? It isn't fresh fish or leafy greens.
No, it's highly processed, shelf-stable, calorie-dense, nutrient-bankrupt manufactured food.
Refined carbohydrates, canned meats loaded with sodium, sugary beverages.
Precisely. The traditional Pacific diet of fresh seafood, taro, and breadfruit has been structurally replaced by cheap, imported industrial food. So a child can consume 2,000 calories a day of processed starches, technically be categorized as overweight, and still suffer from severe micronutrient stunting.
So what does this all mean? The economic structure is literally degrading their biology.
It's a devastating feedback loop.
They are surviving infancy because of modern vaccines, but they are spending their newly extended lives battling severe, chronic, diet-related diseases because the global supply chain has trapped them in a toxic food environment.
And you cannot build a robust, innovative economy if a quarter of your adult workforce is managing a chronic illness like diabetes, and a third of your next generation is facing cognitive limitations from childhood stunting.
It's all connected, and the fact that their entire diet relies on these imports raises an immediate mechanical question. If this population is entirely dependent on global supply chains to eat, how are those physical goods actually reaching an isolated atoll?
Right, the logistics of it.
The trade data presents a waterfall chart of constant cascading deficits. Their exports are microscopic. It's mostly just some tourism, fishing rights, and telecom services. But their imports are immense.
And this structural trade deficit is, unfortunately, the reality for most isolated island nations. But the physical friction of moving those goods is where the true bottleneck lies.
The disparity between their digital infrastructure and their physical infrastructure is staggering. On the digital side, it's a boon.
Oh, absolutely.
Internet usage skyrocketed from less than 1% of the population in the year 2000 to over 65% by 2023. Mobile cellular adoption is nearly universal.
You have people living on tiny strips of coral sand participating seamlessly in the global digital economy.
But then you look at the physical shipping. Have you seen the liner shipping connectivity index data in the report?
Yes, the LSCI, it's abysmal.
It measures how well a country is plugged into global maritime shipping networks, right?
Correct.
Major hubs like Singapore or Shanghai score well over 100. The Marshall Islands scores between a 4 and a 7.
To understand a score of 4 to 7, you really have to look at the logistics of global maritime trade. Massive container ships operated by conglomerates like Maersk or Evergreen, they operate on strict economies of scale.
Right.
They move tens of thousands of containers between massive automated ports. They are not going to divert a massive vessel hundreds of miles off a primary trade route to drop off a few dozen containers for a market of 40,000 people.
It's just not profitable.
Not even close. Therefore, the goods have to be transshipped onto smaller, much less efficient vessels. This makes the cost of importing anything astronomical.
It's like, okay, think of it like wiring a state-of-the-art gigabit fiber optic cable into a house that has no driveway, no paved roads leading to it, and no mailbox.
That's a very vivid way to put it.
You can download terabytes of data in the blink of an eye, but you can't export a physical product to save your life. Even if a local entrepreneur invents a brilliant new physical product or wants to process and export high-value agricultural goods, how do they get it to the global market without the shipping costs completely destroying their profit margins?
It cannot. The friction of distance is just too high.
It fundamentally throttles the economy.
It does. It forces the economy to remain reliant on those external aid transfers, rather than developing an export-led domestic market that could actually generate positive domestic savings.
The isolation is a physical trap. And the ships that do endure that friction to arrive at the ports, they bring the food that causes the health crisis, and crucially, They bring fuel.
Ah, yes.
Which brings us to perhaps the darkest irony in the entire data set, the intersection of energy dependency and climate vulnerability.
That's a brutal paradox.
The Marshall Islands is universally recognized as one of those climate-vulnerable nations on the planet. Yet the data reveals an incredible fossil fuel irony. Over 97.5% of their electricity is produced by burning imported fossil fuels.
Despite the fact that they are literally sinking because of global fossil fuel emissions.
Exactly. Progress toward renewable energy is crawling. Why are they burning the very fuel that is causing the sea levels to rise and destroy their home?
It is born of pure economic pragmatism. Transitioning to renewable energy like building massive solar arrays, installing tidal generators, and upgrading the entire electrical grid to handle intermittent power sources, all of that requires massive upfront capital investment.
And as we saw in the very first data set, their gross domestic savings are deeply negative.
Exactly. They do not have the domestic capital reserves to fund a green transition. Therefore, they remain chained to the operating expense of importing diesel fuel. They pay a massive premium to keep the lights on today at the expense of their tomorrow.
And that tomorrow is arriving incredibly fast. The UN data notes that about 31% of the rural population lives in areas that are less than 5 meters above sea level.
That is roughly 16 feet.
When you factor in a severe Pacific storm surge on top of baseline sea level rise, a third of the rural population is living under the constant threat of total inundation.
The existential threat is not theoretical here. It is measured in inches per year.
The water is rising.
The water is rising, the arable land is salinizing, the population is concentrating in urban centers that are equally vulnerable, and the energy grid keeping the hospitals and desalination plants running is entirely dependent on imported diesel.
When a population faces a crisis of this magnitude, the only shield they have is their government. Which brings us to the governance section of the report.
The Worldwide Governance Indicators, the WGI.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting because it's an absolute paradox. Look at their scores for political stability and voice and accountability.
Which measures democratic participation, freedom of expression, a free media.
Exactly. Those scores are actually quite strong. The citizens have a voice, and the political environment is remarkably stable compared to other developing regions.
And we should note, a strong democratic culture is a genuine asset. It means policies can be debated openly, and leadership transitions occur peacefully without the civil unrest that often paralyzes other nations.
But, and this is a massive, but the WGI radar chart shows that their scores for regulatory quality and rule of law are abysmal.
The administrative gears of the government are completely rusted.
Rusted, completely shut. And here is the resulting tragedy in the data. Only about 12.5% of the poorest quintile, the bottom 20% of earners, are covered by any form of social safety net.
That is staggeringly low.
You have a stable democracy where people can vote and speak freely, but the bureaucratic state is completely incapable of keeping its most vulnerable citizens from starving or drowning.
Yeah.
How do these two realities coexist?
Well, we have to analyze governance impartially, right? We have to separate political ideals from bureaucratic execution.
Okay, unpack that.
What the data demonstrates is that robust democratic participation does not automatically generate administrative efficiency. A nation can host free, fair, and passionate elections, but designing, funding, and accurately distributing a complex social safety net requires a completely different skill set.
Like what?
It requires meticulous databases, anti-corruption safeguards, transparent auditing, and logistical reach. Furthermore, low regulatory quality indicates that the government struggles to formulate and implement sound policies that allow the private sector to function.
Oh, I see. If you can't enforce a contract efficiently or register a business easily, you can't generate the tax base needed to fund that safety net.
Precisely. So the people have the microphone, but the government's hands are tied by a lack of institutional capacity. The political will to help the poorest 20% might exist, but the mechanism to actually deliver the check or the food aid is just broken.
The intent outpaces the infrastructure.
That is exactly it.
Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground here.
We really have.
We've mapped the volatile solar panel-like GDP, the artificial life support of the negative savings rate, the hollowing out of the demographic pyramid,
The paradox of surviving infancy only to face a junk food-driven diabetes epidemic.
the gigabit internet constrained by 19th century shipping lanes, and a democracy struggling to build a safety net as the waters literally rise. It is a heavy, daunting diagnosis.
It is, but the report doesn't stop at diagnosis.
Thankfully, it synthesizes a strategic path forward. Let's examine the three primary policy pillars it recommends.
These recommendations are highly targeted interventions designed to break the specific structural traps we've just analyzed.
Pillar number 1, energy transition. The report strongly advises moving aggressively towards solar and tidal energy to sever the reliance on imported oil.
This is the ultimate macroeconomic lever. The government must secure international climate finance grants, not just general aid, but targeted infrastructure grants to build renewable capacity.
Because if they can replace diesel generators with solar arrays, they instantly eliminate a massive portion of their import bill.
Exactly.
Right.
That keeps capital inside the country, improves the trade deficit, and provides a baseline of energy security that isn't held hostage by global oil market fluctuations.
Pillar number 2, talent retention. The report insists they must fix that 24% high school dropout anomaly and dramatically improve the local job environment to stop the population bleed.
Because without human capital, every other policy is entirely moot. They have to intervene at the secondary school level, perhaps by subsidizing families so teenagers aren't forced to drop out for wage labor.
And fixing that regulatory friction we talked about.
Right. They need to overhaul that weak regulatory quality score to make it radically simple for young people to start digital-first businesses. They have 65% internet connectivity. They need to give the youth the regulatory freedom to monetize that connectivity and build service exports that don't rely on physical shipping lanes.
Which leads directly to the third pillar, precision poverty alleviation. They have to expand that meager 12.5% safety net coverage for the most vulnerable.
As climate pressures inevitably mount, the poorest quintile will be the first to suffer from food price shocks and coastal flooding. Upgrading the bureaucratic capacity to identify these individuals and deliver targeted, efficient financial aid is no longer a matter of social policy.
It's a matter of immediate physical survival.
Exactly.
I want you, our listener, to take a step back and reflect on how your own community handles these exact same tensions. We are all grappling with the friction between our boundless digital lives and the fragile physical realities of our local environments.
The Marshall Islands is just experiencing these universal pressures at a terrifyingly urgent volume.
And if we connect all these data points, this raises an important question that completely reframes the entire report.
It does. Globally, we tend to view nations like the Marshall Islands through a lens of pity. We see them as extreme outliers, tragic victims waiting to be consumed by climate change and economic globalization.
But what if they aren't just an outlier?
What if the Marshall Islands is actually a laboratory for the future of human habitation? Think about the challenges they are forced to solve right now.
Right.
If they can successfully leverage international finance to completely decarbonize an isolated energy grid, if they can figure out how to build a thriving, export-led digital economy that entirely bypasses physical shipping logistics.
And if they can engineer a resilient precision social safety net for a highly urbanized coastal population facing imminent sea level rise.
Couldn't they become the ultimate survival blueprint?
That is a staggering thought.
If they solve the puzzle of how to thrive on a strip of sand 5 meters above the ocean, entirely disconnected from physical supply chains, they will have written the exact step-by-step playbook that every major coastal city on Earth, from Miami to Mumbai to Tokyo, is going to desperately need in the next 50 years.
The very things that make them vulnerable today are forcing them to invent the adaptations of tomorrow. The data we just spent the last hour dissecting isn't just a diagnosis of one isolated nation's struggles.
We might actually be looking at the required cure for the rest of human civilization.
It is entirely possible that their strategy for survival will inevitably become our strategy for survival.
I think that's exactly what the data points toward.
I love that perspective. It changes everything about how you read these numbers. A massive thank you to you, our listener, for sending us this incredible stack of data and for taking this deep dive with us. Keep questioning the data, keep looking for the hidden mechanisms driving the world around you, and we will see you on the next deep dive.